Schönen guten Tag, meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren. Ich begrüße Sie ganz herzlich zu unserem heutigen Live-Webcast von der Theorie zur Praxis. So werden die DevOps-Einführung und Cloud-Implementierung zum Erfolg. Das ist das Thema, mit dem wir uns in den kommenden etwa 60 Minuten beschäftigen wollen. Und grüßen Sie jetzt dazu mit mir meine heutigen Studiogäste. Zum einen haben wir Herrn Lyster hier neben mir von der Firma Skaylink. Schönen guten Morgen.
Morgen.
Er spricht kein Deutsch, leider. Deswegen werden wir nachher auch auf Englisch switchen. Und begrüßen Sie unseren zweiten Experten, der hier im Studio ist. Es ist Herr Florian Quinkert. Er ist Cloud Security Architect von der Firma Henkel. Schönen guten Morgen.
Morgen.
Ja, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, bevor wir in das Thema einsteigen, möchte ich Ihnen noch ein paar Hinweise geben zum Ablauf dieser Sendung. Sie werden jetzt gleich eine Präsentation von den beiden Referenten sehen. Die Folien dazu, die können Sie sich im Bereich Downloads herunterladen. Dann können Sie sich das auch noch mal in Ruhe anschauen. Wir wollen Ihnen aber nicht nur eine Präsentation zeigen, sondern wir möchten, dass Sie sich an diesem Webcast auch beteiligen. Und wie können Sie das tun? Selbstverständlich, indem Sie uns zunächst einmal Ihre Fragen schicken. Sie sehen unterhalb des Videofensters diese kleine Eingabebox. Dort können Sie Ihre Fragen eintippen. Die landen dann bei mir hier auf dem iPad und ich kann sie dann unseren Referenten im Laufe der Sendung stellen. Außerdem haben wir auch noch Umfragen vorbereitet, 2 an der Zahl, die wir Ihnen im Laufe der Sendung präsentieren. Diese finden anonym statt. Und ich möchte Sie hiermit schon ermuntern, möglichst zahlreich daran teilzunehmen, denn je mehr daran teilnehmen, umso aussagekräftiger sind selbstverständlich die Ergebnisse. Und die Ergebnisse werden wir Ihnen selbstverständlich auch im Laufe der Sendung zeigen. So können Sie sich, das ist Ihnen vielleicht eine Hilfe, dass Sie sich einordnen können zum Thema der heutigen Sendung. Dann möchte ich Sie noch darauf hinweisen, dieser Webcast wird wie alle unsere Webcasts aufgezeichnet, spätestens ab morgen wird die Aufzeichnung zur Verfügung stehen. Also wenn Sie unterbrochen werden sollten während der Sendung, nicht ganz zu Ende schauen wollen oder aber vielleicht sagen, Mensch, war interessant und möchten das einem Kollegen empfehlen, der sich das dann anschauen kann. Dazu bietet sich dann halt eben die Aufzeichnung an und Sie als registrierte Teilnehmer werden von uns per E-Mail informiert, sobald die Aufzeichnung verfügbar ist. So, damit genug der Vorrede. Kommen wir zum Thema der heutigen Sendung. Höhere Entwicklungsgeschwindigkeit, bessere Produktqualität oder generell eine bessere, höhere Effizienz. Das sind Herausforderungen, mit denen sich viele Unternehmen heute konfrontiert sehen. Und wie man das umsetzen will, dann kommt es immer wieder da fallen immer wieder bestimmte Begriffe. DevOps ist da ein Thema, Cloud ist ein Thema. Oder auch zum Beispiel der Wechsel von einem zentralen Ansatz zu einer eher dezentralen Herangehensweise. Und auch bei der Firma Henkel gab es diese Herausforderung, wie bei Henkel dieses Thema gelöst wurde. Das werden uns jetzt unsere Referenten erzählen. And with that, I would like to switch over to you two, please.
Thanks. Yeah. So the questions that we would like to answer here is, well, first of all, what was the reason for Henkel to change the existing cloud setup they had, and what did we consider? What should you consider before starting out your cloud journey? And finally, what are some of the specific solutions that we did with Henkel to solve some of the common problems that you will find when doing such a transformation? And I guess we'll have the first poll.
We already are at our first poll. I mentioned that we will have 2. Here's the first one. For the start of our webcast, we would like to hear from you. Where are you currently in your cloud journey? And you see the answering possibilities that we have prepared. One is no cloud footprint yet. We're just a curious listener. Next one is we have workloads in the cloud, but unstructured mostly. VMs, planning for a more structured approach. Next one is we're in the process of defining an enterprise cloud framework and organization. Or last possibility, we have an established CCOE, platform engineering team, and automated landing zone deployments. So give us your votes now, and we will switch over in a second to see the results. Yeah, the results are coming in. Can we see them on the screen, please? Here they are. You see most of the people actually say they don't have a cloud footprint yet. Is that something you would have expected?
Potentially.
Yeah.
Well, it's and then at least we have something something to actually teach people, or at least give them an idea about how to start out.
Okay.
There's also some with a
Cloud Center of Excellence.
Mature setup.
Okay. So, but as we see now, most of the people, they have some workloads in the cloud, but mostly VMs, virtual machines, and more to come, so to say, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So is that the situation that you encounter with most of your customers when you're talking to them?
Yeah, that's probably where a lot of people are at the moment. You would have set up a few simple things. You started out. That's usually migrating your some virtual machines, or just setting them up in the or just starting a few things up in the cloud. But you haven't really progressed into the more specialized services yet.
Okay, so let's hear more from Henkel then, I would say.
Yeah, so we'll just have a few words on us. So my name is Tue. I've been working in the IT industry for 15 plus years, mostly as a consultant, working for Skaylink for the last 3 years, focusing on Asia Cloud.
Yeah, and my name is Florian. I work for Henkel now for 4.5 years, about 3 years in the cloud team, and together with Tue, we have basically designed the new landing zone in Azure for Henkel. Yeah, and then maybe a few details about Henkel. I guess the German-speaking people know Henkel quite a bit. So it's about 150 years old company. We have about 50,000 people working for Henkel all over the world. And some brands you might know are Persil, so the washing detergent, or the Schwarzkopf products. And if you are more in the US, then you might also know the adhesives from Loctite.
Yeah, and Skaylink is a fairly new construct, but with a bunch of companies that have been around for decades, so more than 30 years of industry experience. The focus is primarily, or almost exclusively, cloud offerings and consultancy. So presence is mostly in Germany, but also with a Copenhagen office, which is where I'm from, and also a few offices in Eastern Europe and one in Brazil. So if we dive a bit deeper into where Henkel was and why they wanted to change, we have to talk a little bit about the operating model and what that was looking like. So when Henkel started out, they were looking at they utilized a managed service, which is a good and simple way to get started in the cloud. It offers some basic security, network and identity controls. And you could get a landing zone and some basic services, primarily VMs and storage. It was ordered by request, so the operating model was essentially central operations. It was managed by a central team. For the parts where the application teams needed more specialized workloads, there was a review and approval process, and you would get an individual subscription where there was very little boundaries. So essentially, decentral operations where the individual teams had to manage all the security involved, and that quickly became difficult to operate. There was no audit and no control, and as well you had unhappy users, because the review and approval process was taking a long time, so it was really stopping the innovation from happening. So there was quite a few reasons to change from the cloud architecture team. So the central cloud team's perspective really wanted to remove themselves as a blocker and reduce the complexity to operate and manage the infrastructure. Also making sure that the security requirements were actually enforced automatically, and make sure that especially the collaboration between the different teams was happening a lot better. So you had cloud teams, security, different stakeholders, and the application teams with different agendas and different things they wanted. Needed to work better together, and of course make sure that we actually got more efficient and started applying a lot more automation to what was being done. From the application team's perspective, they wanted to be able to work autonomously, be able to move faster, innovate without having to be held back by long approval processes, and also to be able to use more advanced services such as managed databases and data analytics, and subsequently a lot of the AI services that are being offered. And these are really the reason why you want to move into some of the large hyperscale solutions where you have all these specialized services. So the answer to that was to switch the operating model to enterprise operations, where you essentially build a platform foundation with some centrally managed services, and you bake in all the security and other compliance requirements from the beginning. So you'll have guardrails. Then from there you deploy landing zones, which is essentially a small subscription with a lot of security guardrails and other things attached that allows the team to work within those boundaries, but without having to worry about. But the central IT still has the knowledge that they can't just do whatever they want. And Henkel also wanted full ownership of the solution, so we're building it from scratch to Henkel's requirements, which means that it adapts into all their internal systems, such as the identity management system they have.
May I ask a question here? And how was it that Henkel came to Skaylink for this?
So Henkel, Skaylink was already engaged with Henkel.
Oh, okay. So
we
there was a relationship already established.
Yes. So we had a long history, and we're actually the ones that had been delivering and running the managed service. Mm-hmm. But that was becoming too small and not really fit for purpose for where Henkel was going with the cloud footprint that they were getting. Mm-hmm. So it was a good starting point, but not enough at this point. So we needed to have something different. Yeah. So if we look at what the organization looked like, we had the application team. So these are all the different business teams that are building the apps, and they were feeding requests for architecture changes into the cloud architecture team, which was becoming a huge bottleneck. And on the side, you had all these stakeholder teams, security, network, identity, that were trying to manage the individual applications. So what we did was we created a platform team that essentially captured the requirements from the stakeholders, from the architecture, build out the platform foundation, and then we're responsible for all the requests coming in from the application teams. A lot of the application teams, so for the different teams to get started in the cloud, they were you'd say a lot of them were not very mature and not especially when it came to cloud. So for this, we created an enabling team, the cloud adoption team, which would be working with the application teams on a project basis and helping them get started early on the proper cloud architecture, and also making sure that everything was set up correctly in terms of deploying the infrastructure. And they were working very closely with the platform team. With Henkel, it's essentially a co-located team, so they're sitting together and can quickly solve issues with the platform and feedback changes to them.
Just one more question. The people from the platform teams and the cloud adoption teams are these people that are coming from the application teams and the cloud architecture teams, or where do they come from?
So they are coming from mostly from our organization.
Oh, okay.
But it is a small unit that specializes in cloud architecture and infrastructure deployment. Mm-hmm. So it is a separate specialized team that can come in and help elevate the level, the skill level, mm-hmm. at the application teams. So they're good at building the applications, but don't really know how to use the services that are available in Azure or how you would deploy your services in there. There's a lot of different things that you have to consider.
Okay.
And a final point on the platform team is that, especially if you're watching this as a senior management, don't view it as a cost overhead, which is often a bit of a pitfall, but more as an enabler, similar to your network team or similar teams, something that drives cost efficiency and speed of innovation for all the application teams. And yeah, over to you.
Yeah, thank you too. So I would like to talk a little bit more about the different teams we have, and we would also start with the platform team. So the platform team is basically the team which is building the foundation of the whole platform. So central services like update management, we defined the access management, backup concept, and also we develop certain central services. So for example, certificate management. We provide Terraform templates so that teams can use them already. And then one other very important point for the platform team is that we have 24/7 support for the platform-owned components. So for example, if there's an issue with the network, then the teams can create an incident, and then we have 24/7 support. So even if it is 4 a.m. at night, someone from the platform team will take care of this issue. Yeah, and what is also very important, the platform team, as Tu already said, is working closely together with all our other teams. So for example, with the network team and the security teams, to make sure that we capture their input and make sure that the platform is developed in a common Henkel way. Yeah, then the second team Tu also introduced is the cloud adoption team. What we saw at Henkel is, and I guess most of the audience will know that, because I think other organizations will have very similar issues. We have a very big variety of different skill levels. So we have teams who are very good at building their own infrastructure. And then we also have teams who are good at developing an application, but they have no experience with the cloud. And then they can come to the cloud adoption team basically and say, hey, we have this web application and we would like to run it on Azure. And then the cloud adoption team can help basically with the initial architecture. It can help with developing the infrastructure or also assisting with the deployment or configuration. What is interesting from Henkel perspective, basically the application teams are funding the cloud adoption team because they are paying based on time and material for the efforts the adoption team has. And then we can very good plan because we know in advance, okay, there's a certain amount of requests to the adoption team, and then we can scale up or scale down depending on the number of requests. And what is also important, the cloud adoption team is handling the migration of workloads from our old landing zone or legacy landing zone into the new one.
Just a quick question. You said you can scale up or scale down.
Yeah.
How fast does that work? I mean, if you say, okay, they are coming, we have lots of incoming requests. Yeah. So how fast can you scale up?
I would say within weeks. I mean, it always depends a little bit on the availability at Skaylink, I would say. But usually I would say we are able to do that within weeks. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and then last, the application team, that is not really a team we are responsible for. So all over Henkel, we have different application teams. But what is interesting for the application teams is previously they were not the owner of their infrastructure. It was basically with the central IT. And now in our new model, the platform team only provides a landing zone or a subscription. And then within this subscription, the teams can, if they are capable of, basically developing their infrastructure and are fully responsible for it. And I think that is very good because it gives the application teams a lot of freedom. And as we said before, so if a team is not able to create infrastructure on their own, then they can go to the adoption team and can get support. So the motto is basically, you build it, you run it. Yeah, and after the teams, we would like to talk a little bit about how we collaborate with users. Because in the end, if you develop a platform, you're not developing the platform for yourself, but you're developing the platform for the users, for the different application teams. And therefore, it is very important how you communicate with the different stakeholders or with the different application teams. And for that purpose, we have a central ticket system, so the teams can reach out to us, create tickets. We have also the adoption team, which we already introduced. And then we try to document our platform features as good as possible. And what might be interesting there, we also try to automate that. So if some features change, then we automatically update the documentation, because I guess most of you already know that documentation is pretty fast outdated. And then what we also try is to build something like a cloud user community. So basically, users can ask questions, and then either other users can answer those questions, or some people from the platform team also take a look at those questions and then can help the users, so that we really have something like a community built. And we also try to inform the users about what is going on the platform. So we present new features, and we try to gather feedback from the users.
And does that work globally across all the different?
Basically, it works globally. So usually we try to have, for example, different sessions in different time zones, so that we can support Asia and North America. Yeah.
Quite ambitious.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
And with that, I would hand over to Tu again.
Yeah. So one of the things that we really wanted to do when we were setting up the platform team and adoption team was run things with DevOps. And DevOps is a bit of a buzzword being used liberally on a lot of different topics. But what we mean with it is I'll just spend a few seconds describing what we mean when we say it. So traditionally, you have a development team that develops an application, and if you're lucky, they're also testing it, writing some automated test. Otherwise, you'd have a test team that does the quality assurance. And then when you have a release ready, it's being dropped over to the operations team over what we've put in here as the wall of confusion. So you'll have this conflict between dev and operations on who should fix issues. And often issues are being thrown back and forth, because they could also be in the borderland. They're something like performance. Often the finger is pointing at operations, but it could also be due to architecture or defects in the application. So the answer to this is, of course, to join these two together and have a single team that is responsible for the end-to-end life cycle of an application, which means that there's clear ownership, and like we say, you build it, you run it. But this also allows the team to optimize for flow. So that means deploy changes more frequently, often daily or even multiple times a day in smaller increments. And that is really where you get the value. There's no value in having code sitting somewhere in a test environment. You need to get it into production, into the hands of the users. And once you have that, you also start to get constant feedback, immediate feedback. You figure out if things are actually working, if it's what the users wanted. Also, if there are issues, you can fix them quickly. And ultimately, this allows the team to learn and experiment, so they can test assumptions and fail fast if needed. So this was really key in what we wanted to, in how we're running things in the platform team. And there's also a bunch of development principles that we really wanted to bake in from the start. A lot of these were already in place in Henkel in various degrees, but some of them probably needed a bit more enforcement. So the first one was everything is code, so no clicking things up in Azure or manually configuring. Git is the source of truth. It goes especially for the infrastructure. So we're running everything out of Terraform as a state management and deployment tool, and of course continuous integration and deployment. Lots of automated testing wherever it's possible. And go a little bit more and talk a little bit more about that later. and also 4 I's principle, meaning that all critical parts should be peer reviewed. So pull requests on all code changes, and pipeline approvals if you're making critical changes into production or elevating privileges in a production environment. That also requires an additional approval. So, if we have a quick look at the project timeline, so how we sort of gone through the different stages of maturity. We had a pretty ambitious goal to be able to deliver an MVP in 3 months, and deliver that so we could actually test it with the first couple of teams that were really eager to get started. We managed that, and you'd say it's probably a bit immature product at that point, but then we had a couple of months to iron out the main issues. And after 5 months, we didn't create any more of the old legacy landing zones, but we're purely running on the new platform. And after 8 months, we started looking into the first migration from the old structure and pulling workloads into the new, which was early, but also gave a lot of learnings and understanding of what things were actually looking like out in the real world. And then if we continue the path of maturity, then after about a year, we started delivering some of the central service offerings. So disaster recovery, for instance, Terraform Enterprise, which is a solution where you can have the infrastructure state in a central place, and the teams don't have to deal with that themselves. They can tap into some of these central services. Also, building out sandboxes, which is an environment where they can experiment. And then finally, the next step in maturity is now providing some self-service platforms, some IDPs for the application teams. For instance, an ability to make firewall changes themselves, so that gets automatically approved if they're within certain boundaries. And without going too much into details on which platform we built this on, this was done in Asia, and we're following the Microsoft best practices, which is described in the cloud adoption framework. And as you can see, there's lots of items here you can dig into. Other hyperscalers such as AWS and GCP have similar frameworks. Suffice to say, you can spend a lot of time working here. For the MVP, we were just focusing on the highlighted areas here. It's gotten a lot bigger since then, but initially we're just looking at setting up some roles and permissions for the users and applications that was to run on Azure. Setting up a hierarchy for the subscriptions in management groups. It's getting a little, now there's some Azure terms, so don't worry, we'll try not to get too deep into that. Then of course setting up the landing zones both for the management parts that was used by the platform, the platform foundation, and also the individual landing zones that would be handed over to the application teams, and also setting up something like a DevOps project and setting up the integration to allow that project to deploy infrastructure through a pipeline. And last, setting up the network connectivity. So all infrastructures running in virtual networks, and there was specific hubs created for the connectivity. So at this point, I think we're pretty much through the initial part of where why we started out and how we approached the problem. So at this point, we probably want to dive into some of the more specific topics.
Okay, and now you can choose what topics you are most interested in, and and our speakers can give you more details on those. So here are the options that you can choose from. The automated testing of platform features, for example, or the internal developer platforms, the firewall factory or landing zone configuration. Or do you want to hear more about the security topics, enabling services and policies? Another option is the central services that have been has been talking about Sandbox, TF Enterprise, update management. Or do you want to hear more about the migration process to the new landing zone? So these are the options, and you can choose on that. And our speakers will then give us more detail on those topics. So, and we see that
I think you can also choose multiple topics.
Yeah, you can, of course. Thanks for mentioning that. You can choose multiple topics, so you don't have to focus on just one. So if you're interested in security and the central services, you can choose both. So, but as I can see, security is way ahead. So most people want to hear more about the security issues, how you enable services and policies. So do you want to start with that, or?
Yeah, we can
Should I start with service enablement, maybe?
Yeah, we can jump, quickly jump across.
There we are. Yeah, so the basic idea here is that we had a challenge. You know that Azure has more than 200 services, and if you just let users create arbitrary infrastructure with those services, then it is very likely that you will get a very unsecure and unorganized infrastructure, I would say. And therefore, our solution was that we use something called Service Enablement Framework. And for that purpose, we basically disallowed in the beginning all services. So there was nothing allowed at all. And then the Service Enablement Framework is a framework from Microsoft to basically assess the security readiness of different Azure services. So you basically have a questionnaire. So on the next slide, you can see an excerpt of it. In different categories, you can take a look at different areas, and then you answer for each of those services a bunch of questions. And based on the answers, you can then decide whether you want to allow that service or not. I mean, usually you will allow the service, but what you can also do is that you say, okay, we allow the service, but we would have to have certain restrictions. So either you enforce that via policies, or you say that the people should use certain configurations. And what we did is, initially, we did this service enablement framework for services where we pretty sure that they will be used, so virtual machines, for example. And then the users can also request new services. So for example, if there is this new fancy AI service a team wants to use, then they can come to us and we do the service enablement. And that is, yeah.
I have a question. I assume that Henkel also has a dedicated security team operating worldwide.
Exactly.
So how do you interoperate with those guys?
So we basically have a colleague from the cloud security team who is doing the service enablement with us. And they were also involved in which of the questions we use for the service enablement framework. So it is not that we use the whole catalog. We just use a Henkel-specific version of it.
Okay.
And then we work closely together with the security teams. Yeah. And then maybe we can quickly also talk about Azure policies, because it is right here, then we don't have to switch all over again.
Also very much part of the security.
Exactly, and it is also part of the security, and it fits very well to the service enablement, because as I said, as an outcome of a service enablement of a service, usually you have a bunch of policies you would like to enforce. Just because if you don't have any policies, then usually the users will use the easiest configuration, and that is usually not the most secure one. And what we do is then, after the service enablement framework, we define a certain set of policies which we enforce globally. And if a team for some reason has certain restrictions because their use case doesn't allow this policy or the enforcement of this policy, then they can come to us and get an exemption for this policy. And then I think the second result was
the migration process was also something that many people are interested in.
You can talk about that one.
Yeah, so we can put a few words to that. So migration is essentially, so we had existing infrastructure and services running in Asia, and for that to be moved into the new structure, where you suddenly had all these security guardrails in the form of policies, you had a new network, you had new custom roles and permissions that was granted. So they had a lot of changes that needed to happen, and quite often, just to adhere to the security principles, you might actually have to make architecture changes. So you had to potentially take out a service or add something else in that actually worked within the security boundaries. So it can become a really quite a large project to migrate a workload. And the best advice is probably again, start early, because there's a lot of assumptions that you make when you're building out your platform on the workloads that's supposed to run there, and until you start actually bringing them in, then you're not really getting the learnings. So as soon as you start that, it allows you to test your assumptions, and you get feedback. So the initial migration we did took longer than I anticipated, but it also meant that a lot of features were added back into the platform. And another thing that it did was it meant that we ended up providing various tools, not just for the platform engineers that were working in the platform team, but also for the application teams. So created several, for instance, some scripts that could be run against a subscription, create an assessment of the potential issues or the issues that you would have. So what were the roles, the permissions that were existing, which had to be changed? What were the violations of policies that had to be fixed? So that gave the application teams an idea of the size of the work that they needed to go through to actually be able to migrate the workload. And of course, make sure to document all these different steps, so the teams can actually use it. And without going too much into detail, we have this little slide of the process, which gives an idea for, at least if you're looking at sort of a time span of what it looks like. So we generally use about a week for the initial assessment, which would be done by the platform team. Look at what are the issues at hand. Then you'd have a workshop with the team, somewhere from depending on how big it is, half a day. Go through all the issues, what needs to be done, come up with a plan for how to solve that, and then you essentially start fixing the problems in the infrastructure. Often you'd also have to move things into Terraform state if things had just been manually configured. But eventually you were ready to try to take your initial environment, often that would hopefully be a dev environment, and upgrade the infrastructure, and then move that environment into the new structure. And once you do that, you'd probably find some issues. The team can test it. Then we fix those problems, and we try to do it again with the test environment. And by the time you get to a production environment, things are hopefully looking good. And the aim was to be able to upgrade and move a production environment in an hour. So which is probably something that people would be interested in. How long is your production environment actually going to be unavailable? So
when all the teams are involved in this process at different stages.
Yes. So it could either be done by the application teams themselves, or they could acquire the help of the cloud adoption team, which is most of the time what teams would do, especially to get started. And then you might have some things that are fixed by the adoption team, and some things that can be handled by the application teams themselves.
Okay.
So
great. So any more about the migration process?
Or do we have any? There's probably lots we can talk about, but maybe we should grab another topic.
Well, central services also was an area of interest. So Sandbox, TF Enterprise, update management.
Maybe update management. I think it's the next one, or Sandbox.
Where was that?
Now you're going to the direction of update management, I would say.
Which one am I going for?
To the left, back. Here.
There we go.
Yeah. Yeah, about the Azure Update Management Center. I guess an issue most of you already know or also know is that installing security updates is first very important, but second often not done, because it is forgotten or not done regularly. And we wanted to avoid that in the new landing zone, and therefore we are using the Azure Update Management Center. And by using, I mean we automatically onboard all new virtual machines via a policy to this Azure Update Management Center. And then based on a default schedule at the weekend, every week, all machines are updated automatically. And if for some reason this default schedule is not working for a team, then they can come to us and say, okay, we need a different schedule because we have running tests or whatever at that schedule, and then they can get an exemption or a different time schedule. And for us, it is very good because we can ensure that security patches are installed without having to do anything manual.
That happens quite, I assume that happens a lot because you mentioned it here on the slide, the different time zones alone.
Yeah, exactly. So you have to make sure that you align that with the different teams. So I think we have 3 or 4 default schedules, not quite sure. But it is usually pretty easy done with the different time zones. So that is not an issue. Yeah. And we can also talk about sandboxes as another central service. It is at the other end of the presentation, of course. There. Yeah, I mean, we already briefly talked a little bit about the concept of sandboxes. We got feedback from the teams that they would like to have a test environment. And in our new landing zone, we have quite a few policies, and that makes testing and developing in the new landing zone directly sometimes a bit cumbersome if you just want to test, if you just want to quickly test the service, for example. And therefore, we developed this concept of sandboxes. And the idea behind the sandboxes is that you get a time-limited subscription, and then you can test in this subscription your service. And we have just a limited set of policies because, of course, we need some kind of baseline security. We cannot allow everything. But compared to the actual landing zone, it is a lot less restricted. What is also important, you don't have to go through service enablement. So all services are available in the sandboxes. So if Microsoft gets a new service, then you can just test it in the sandbox. Yeah, and what is very important, last bullet point, it is only for testing and proof of concept and not for production use cases. And as a recommendation, you should double check that because we already had teams who used that for production use cases.
Okay. Why time limited? Is that for security reasons, or what's the reason behind that? Or is it just to keep cost in control, keep control of the cost?
Yeah, it's also because of costs, but it makes the likelihood that somebody uses it for production a bit less likely.
Okay.
Because if you already know it will be gone in 3 months, then you will likely not build your production system in there.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And teams will often use the loopholes that are that are in place. So.
Of course, yes.
Yeah. Of course, yeah.
So, do we want to talk about the last 2 issues? And by the way, feel free to send us your questions or comments if you have any. We're not restricted to these topics, so if you have any questions on the general topic of today's webcast, just send them here and I can read them out and to our speakers. So we had two more areas, the automated testing of platform features and the internal developer platforms. So do we want to talk about these as well?
Yeah, I guess we can start by putting a few words on testing.
Mm-hmm.
So the initial structure we had was to have two hierarchies, and here it gets a little bit Asia specific, but you have management group hierarchy. So these are the top parts, and then subscriptions is the bottom part of this diagram. And the subscriptions is where you actually place your different services and your cloud infrastructure. But the management groups is a way of organizing them. And what we did was build two separate hierarchies, which means that you could separate the production environments and the non-prod environments. So all the test and development environments could have a different set of policies and also completely separate network connectivity. And the thing is to remember, of course, is that for all the 500,000 developers that is working in Henkel, the non-prod environments is actually their production environments. If you make a mistake in your network configuration or a policy that impacts all the environments, then they can't work. So to solve this, we added a separate hierarchy, which we call Canary. So this is where the platform team and security team can develop and test new policies, new configuration options, and that means when you're rolling out your changes, which you of course have in code somewhere, and you're using pipelines to deploy them, then these are first applied to the Canary hierarchy, which means you can run your tests there, and when you're happy that everything is working after usually at least 24 hours, then you move that change to the non-prod, which means that now the teams can see that their test environments are impacted, and if things are failing, they can dial you up and tell you to fix it. And when you're absolutely certain that things are still good, then you progress it into production. And the test that we're running, and it's often a bit harder when you're talking about infrastructure changes compared to an application. But what we have is for all pull requests, we have some linting of the code, so Terraform, and various component tests depending on where the change is applied. So it could be the virtual networks or some features of Azure DevOps, and then some validation of the deployed resources, that some actual deployment or actual change. And this will often could take up to a couple of hours to validate a pull request. Then on a larger level, we have a daily deployment of a landing zone in the Canary environment. So this validates that at all points, at all times, we can actually deploy a landing zone for a team. And on top of that, we also have deployments daily of most of the services that are enabled on the platform. So this means that if we have a breaking change happening, we will sometime in the next 24 hours, we will see that that service no longer being deployed properly, and we can fix things before we're breaking it in the test environments. And a couple of other things that we have for automation is like Florian mentioned, we have some automatic updates of documentation happening, which makes makes it a lot easier. And we also have some continuous audit of various drift from the baseline that we have set. So this especially goes for some of the privileged access that can be granted, which means that if someone by accident adds themselves in as a role somewhere, we'll be notified, and we can either make sure that we'll determine whether that was something that should happen, or we make sure we remove that access.
Okay. So anything else you would like to add at this point, or?
I mean, we can quickly talk about the Firewall Factory as an example for the internal developer platform, if we have time, but I think it's fine, yeah.
Yes, we have still about 10 minutes left.
Yeah. So the basic idea is that we want to make sure that users can work as independent as possible, but at the same time, we also want to guarantee that we have a secure environment. And in Azure, we have a firewall, so the network security groups, which basically control in and outbound traffic to virtual networks. And the issue we saw is that it is a very slow manual process to review and update and maintain those rules. And therefore, we developed a little tool which is called Firewall Factory internally. And there we basically have a set of built-in rules where we say that those are very important for typical tasks. So you will always need them. And then if a user requests a change via a pull request, so it is all written in code, then we have a tool which can automatically decide whether a rule can be auto-approved or auto-denied, or whether a manual approval is necessary. And that helps a lot because it makes a lot of the requests a lot faster. And for the users, it is very good because they can work independently and faster than before.
Okay, thank you. So, once again, ladies and gentlemen, I encourage you to send us your questions. Like I said, we still have some minutes left. So, if there are any topics that you are interested in, just send them along and we will address them, try to address them here. In the meantime, I have one question. So, I've been listening very keenly to your presentation, and we all know there's this big buzzword going on right now, AI. And I was listening, and my question is, I didn't hear it. So, and my question is, does AI already play a role in this context, or are there plans for it to play a role in the future? I mean, I could imagine, for example, automated tests having to do with AI. So, but you're the experts. Just
So what I can definitely tell from a service perspective, we see that a lot of application teams request AI services. So that is definitely a big thing from the perspective of the application teams. When it comes to us as a platform team or platform developers, I think so far it is not the biggest topic yet. Maybe the developers at Skaylink are already using it. I mean, I'm not sitting next to them, don't know that. But for the development right now, not really.
No, I know it's something that I think in the context of what we're doing, you could apply that to, for instance, some of the documentation. So feed that into a chatbot, and that's something that we are doing at other projects. Essentially, training a chatbot on something like the documentation of a service, and then allowing the users to query that. So trying to take the tedious work of going through all the documentation out of the picture.
Okay, so, that's what happens a lot of the time when AI is involved.
Yeah, but I'm not sure. It's probably not quite where the next thing we need at Henkel, but it's definitely an option at some point.
Okay, but at least teams are requesting for AI services to be implemented.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, still no questions coming in from the audience. So, do you have any finishing statements?
We have this wrap-up slide. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's go to the wrap-up slide then.
No, not too far. Yeah, should I just do the wrap-up slide, or are we waiting for questions? Or
I would say just start with the wrap-up slide,
Okay.
and we wait. Maybe there are some questions coming in, and we'll see.
Okay. Yeah, so the basic idea of this last slide is that we have some lessons learned for you. So based on our experience, what we saw during the past 2 years, 2.5 years. And the first point we would like to mention is start early. So if you already have a big footprint, if you have a lot of application teams working on the cloud, and then you build a new landing zone, you will have a hard time to migrate the stuff from the old landing zone to the new one. So our recommendation is to start early. Then the second point, as I already mentioned before, you are building the platform for the teams, and therefore try to involve the teams. Get feedback. They should have a voice in the requirement and prioritization decisions. Just make sure that they can give you some kind of feedback. And then in the same direction, and maybe a little bit contradicting, is this point mixed feedback. When we asked for feedback, then it was often not that good and not that easy to get very good and useful feedback. What worked very well for us was that we invited people who are like power users of the platform, so just a very small set of people, and then we asked for feedback. But if we ask the wider audience, then often it is hard to get feedback. Then also similar direction is the communication strategy. I talked a little bit about, or we talked a little bit about what we do to involve teams, and we can only recommend that you do that. So do newsletters, town halls, do sprint release messages in your teams channels. Just get the teams involved and give them the option that they feel that they are part of the platform. Then also an important point is clear responsibilities. You saw that we work with quite a few teams, so like security teams and network teams, and therefore it is very important that you discuss with them who's responsible for what, because otherwise you will at some point have some political discussions, I would say. Then also important is to use automation from our point of view. I mean, everything is in code, so that we basically can deploy the infrastructure automatically, but also what we mentioned, the topic of documentation, for example. So it is very helpful if you can use automation there, because it will free up some time, and that time you can use on different topics. And then last but not least, the user enablement. As I said, or as we said, we are building the platform for the teams, and therefore you should make sure that you define the boundaries, but within those boundaries, the teams should have freedom and do their work, because in the end, the application teams have some applications they would like to develop, and you should make sure that you just help them.
Okay, thank you for those lessons learned. I think that should help our audience. And one thing that just came to my mind, is there anything that in retrospect, you would say, if we had known that before, we would have done it differently? So sort of a trap that you ran into?
From personal perspective, I think involving the teams even earlier, maybe. So really getting the feedback after a couple of weeks already. Tell them we are going to build this new landing zone.
Okay.
Involve them as early as possible, maybe.
Yeah. I'd say there was a lot of workshops held before to gather requirements and make sure that we had engaged stakeholders. There's a lot of things you learn down the road that you could have done, you probably should have done earlier, but I don't think there's any major things that we would have changed. Not that I recall.
No.
So just keep in mind, in the end, it's not the technology that's in first place, but it's the people.
Yeah.
People have to work with it. They have to use the technology. Yes. So involve people as early as possible. Get in contact with the teams.
Yeah. Especially in a large organization like Henkel, where you have so many stakeholders. That it's a huge undertaking to change something as fundamentally as this.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. I think that's a nice finishing statement. And with that, I look at the clock, and we're at the end of our webcast today. My thanks to you, and Florian, for being here, for telling our audience all your experiences about this project. And my thanks, of course, to you, ladies and gentlemen, for taking the time and being with us today. And yeah, thanks for taking part in the polls. And unfortunately, no questions, but I think they were all happy with the presentations and what you were telling them. So with that, I'd like to say goodbye from the studio, and have a nice afternoon, and see you soon.